r/ask Reddit. Zodthatimetravella says, who is the most famous person you have ever spoken to? Starster42 says, I've told this story on Reddit before. I met John Candy on a plane when I was a little kid while traveling with my family. He was a big man. He had the whole row to himself in front of us with the armrest up between seats so he could be more comfortable. The stewardesses were blocking anyone from coming up and bothering him, even though they themselves were not exactly leaving him alone, what with talking to him constantly and laughing at his enjoyable banter the whole trip. At some point he got up to go to the bathroom. On his way back, as he passed our row to get to his, he looked at me and pretended to do a double take, like he was surprised. He said, "Hey, you're the quietest kid ever, don't you talk?" The way he said it was so friendly that I just smiled and giggled. Then he had a pleasant conversation with my parents, who had been dying to talk to him the entire flight, but were too polite to bother him. Not even 2 weeks later we heard he had passed. Setting just 4709 says, I met Buzz Aldrin once when I was a kid. I asked him if he saw aliens on the moon, and he said I sure did. Smegma 0 N Demand says, I knew it. Mountain Leader 4344 says, former President George H.W. Bush. Met him at a Blockbuster Video in Houston back in 2006. Very approachable even with security. Very friendly. He had a DVD of the movie Little Miss Sunshine in his hand and asked if I had seen it. Kanobrod says, in 2000 I was on vacation in China and met the governor of Fujian province. His name, Xi Jinping, is more widely known now. Fafusia says, Darius Rucker and Pat Monahan are probably #2 and #3 on my list, but #1 is Alex Trebek. Got to spend a half hour one day with him and an hour the next day. Wish it would have been longer, but I lost my third game. Zakram says, ex-president of my country, he's my mom's first cousin. Hutzitrolson says, George Lucas. His wife became the head of an educational organization I worked for, and I had a brief conversation with him after he visited my program. Black Gold 09 says, years ago I worked in a restaurant that Philip Seymour Hoffman would frequent. He was quiet at first, but after I had served him probably more than 50 times in my first year he was super friendly with me. We would talk about all kinds of stuff. It was awesome. I was working and spoke to him the night before he died. Now Inspection 6336 says, Arnold Schwarzenegger, I was like 8, okay not really but young, talked about action movies, still remember it, felt like I was talking to a giant, but he was super nice. Typhlias says, probably Aubrey Plaza. She was at an event to raise money for her old theater in Delaware a few years back and was super friendly and nice to talk with. Lionel Chesterfield says, I sold shoes to Pauly Shore one time. He came in, walked up to the shoe wall and said check out these sneakers in that classic voice he did back in the day. He was nice and friendly, but he had glasses, a hat and a scarf on to try and keep a low profile. His voice and mannerisms gave him away though. Abacus 118 says, oh, that's easy. Kermit the Frog. Maltesa Cow says, Tom Hanks. He was filming A League of Their Own, I was an extra. Chill dude. Great experience. The next day I talked to Rosie O'Donnell. Total ass bag. 0/10ths do not recommend. Bradx says, Paul Newman. Civilized _primate says, Robin Williams back in 2009/10. I was in college working security at the campus theater he was performing in. He was wandering the hallways before the show started and chatted with myself, another security person, and a janitor for about 5 minutes before a very anxious stage manager told him it was time to go on stage. Krauser Catlody 331 says, I had the late rapper DMX as a customer when I was working at CVS in college. I didn't recognize him, but my coworker did. The interaction was not memorable in a good or bad way. He didn't stand out as a customer. Sanity_LARP says, the closest thing I have to this is when Will Ferrell and I made eye contact and pointed at each other. Thrilling 1031 says, according to them, Jeff Van Gundy. According to me, the voice actor for SpongeBob. Sophia_Meriza says, while living in a hotel due to my flooded house, I had an unexpected encounter with Sylvester Stallone. It happened while he was enjoying a bowl of cereal. I mustered up the courage to approach him and asked for his autograph, to which he kindly agreed. However, deep down, I secretly wished for something even more thrilling, a punch from the legendary actor himself. Just imagine how legendary that story would be. Davster39 says, many presidents, current and past, of Lions Club International. r/ask Reddit. R5Goo7247Y says, serious, what did a stranger do/say that made you go damn, they were raised right? Awkward Fox Patrol says, back when I worked in a mall kiosk 15 years ago, I was used to people rudely asking for directions. One time I was doing something with my back turned, and I heard a young male voice say, excuse me, ma'am, I'm sorry if I'm bothering you, but could I please ask you for some directions? I was so shocked at the sincere politeness. I turned around to tell him where the store he wanted was, and even when his companion interrupted me to say, nah, man, it's over here, I actually took the time to correct him, because it had moved a month ago, and I genuinely wanted to help this person. Normally I'd just shrug and let them figure it out themselves. When he left, he nodded and said, thank you ma'am, I appreciate you taking the time. Have a good day. This kid, probably about 14 to 15, was dressed in ripped sagging jeans and a jersey 3 sizes too big. Very easy to stereotype him, and yet I still remember him and his manners this many years later. Throw Retired Office says, just the other day, we went to pick up a few quick groceries as a family. On the way out, in the parking lot, an old man was trying to do a weird U-turn in reverse to back into a parking spot. He was not paying attention at all and almost hit our son. Husband and I were both so angry, we had to encourage each other to come back to our car and get control of ourselves rather than start a fight. Then, as husband backed out of our parking spot, he comes really close to hitting an old man pushing a cart. He looked angry, rightfully so. Husband rolls down his window and apologizes. The old man looks at him, says, you know, I have done the same thing myself, and went on his way into the store. He reacted a lot more graciously than we were going to. Good lesson. K1RKL4ND says, about 20 years ago, had a kid pull around by my side of the street with a flat tire. He popped open his trunk and dug around and got out the spare tire and was looking at the scissor lift. I moseyed over and asked if he could use some help. He said sure, and I changed it for him, pointing out where to put the jack so the weight distribution was right. While we were chatting, he asked where there was a good place to eat around here. I rattled off a restaurant and a fast food place a little ways down the street. He thanked me when we got done and apologized for not having any cash on him. I laughed and said I was a college kid a few years prior, no sense wasting money on what a little bit of effort can fix. He came back at 5:30 that evening with a burger, fries, and a chocolate shake. He ended up moving a few blocks away, and a few years later was the best man at my wedding. Swartz 888 says, stranger 1 misses street bin, leaves the garbage on the ground and walks off. Stranger 2 picks up garbage after him and disposes it correctly. Stranger 2 doesn't say anything and continues with his day. SRH99 says, was sitting in a coffee shop line last week. Old man in the front of the line pays for his coffee with a 20, puts a dollar in the tip jar and leaves the rest of his change on the counter as he's juggling his cane and coffee. Teenage kid behind him gets to counter, sees the change, grabs it, leaves the line to give it back to the old man. Long story short, he ends up holding the man's coffee and helping him out to his car. Then the kid comes back in the shop and rejoins the line in the back. Of course he got bumped to the front, but he obviously wasn't expecting it. Top Genital says, I sneezed while waiting in line to buy ice cream. This 3 to 4 year old goes bless you, and I thanked him, and he replied you're welcome sir. That made my day. Deterministic_links says, not sure if it is raised right, because the man was in his 70s or older, so enough time to get over how you were raised and define who you want to be. But I was stuck pushing my bike with a flat tire for about 3 kilometers. In the last 10 minutes I was joined by this oldish man, who talked to me very friendly and patiently. I was an exchange student and not too great with the language, and just accompanied me for a good bit under the hot sun. I'm pretty sure he did it because I was looking annoyed and tired and overheated. Good man. It was a wonderful friendly experience. Aiko_Kimura says, I was at a coffee shop one day, feeling down and lost in my thoughts. As I stood in line, a stranger in front of me turned around and handed me a small note with a genuine smile. The note simply said, you are enough. Keep going. It was a simple act of kindness, but it made me realize that there are still people out there who genuinely care about others and are willing to uplift them. That moment truly made me go damn, they were raised right. Maleficent Excuse 510 says, my neighbor saved my life from a fire when I was 3 months old. When I was in my 20s, I finally got to thank her. Spasopunk17 says, yesterday, I was walking into a gas station and there were a couple of kids in front of me. Like maybe 12 or 13 years old. The girl walked in first, the boy glanced at me and opened the door for me with the cutest smile. Perfect gentleman. Yapia Plahavenescent says, when I first got married, I rented a U-Haul to move wife and me into our new apartment. In typical U-Haul fashion, they didn't have the truck I reserved when I went to pick it up. I was arguing with the clerk, and he offered me a cargo van and $40 discount. I continued to argue. At one point, an older black gentleman waiting behind me piped up. Excuse me young man. This is none of my business, but if it were me, I'd take the deal, make as many trips as necessary, and take your wife out to dinner with that $40. In one sentence, that man crossed a racial divide to teach me a life lesson about frugality that stayed with me to this day. He realized my ignorance and went out of his way to help. That's all for this video. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe.